I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today we're continuing with Section 6.2 of Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. The Introduction by Israel Regardi. The ability to create a synthesis of diverse points of view, scientific and social and philosophical, is a rare gift. Not many are there who dare even attempt such a task. Imagine anyone trying to make sense of an amalgam of Timothy Leary's 8 neurological circuits, Gurdjieff's self-observation exercises, Korzybinski's general semantics, Aleister Crowley's magical theorems, the several disciplines of yoga, Christian Science, relativity and modern quantum mechanics, and many other approaches to understanding the world around us. A man is required with an almost encyclopedic education, an incredibly flexible mind, insights as sharp as those whom he is trying to synthesize, and mirabile dictu, a wonderful sense of humor. For several years, ever since I first became familiar with the writings of Robert Anton Wilson, I've been struck with his ever-present sense of bubbling humor and the wide scope of his intellectual interests. Once I was even so presumptuous as to warn him in a letter that his humor was much too good to waste on hoi polloi, who, generally speaking, would not understand it and might even resent it. However, this effervescent lightness of heart became even more apparent in Cosmic Trigger and more latterly in the trilogy of Schrodinger's cat. I've sometimes wondered whether this extraordinarily wide range of intellectual roving is too extensive and therefore perplexing to the average reader. Be that as it may, the humor and synthesis are even more marked in this brilliant, ambitious piece of writing, Prometheus Rising. Even if your reading has already made you familiar with some of the concepts employed by Wilson in this book, nonetheless his elucidation, even of the simplest, the most basic, is illuminating. At this moment I am referring to the imprint theory, which he makes considerable use of. Much of the same is true of his references to and explanation of Leary's 8 neurological circuits. We become familiar with them all over again, as if they had not been introduced to us before. Moreover, I love the subtle and almost invisible use of mystical dogma that permeates all his writings. For example, consider the opening of Chapter 6. It quotes a particularly meaningful sentence from William S. Burroughs. There's no mention, nor need there be, of any anterior teaching regarding the law of three, as it may be called. But one doctrine that emanated from a medieval mystical school philosophizes that there are always two contending forces, for the sake of convenience called severity and mildness, with a third that always reconciles them. It's paramount to this doctrine, which has been stated and stated again in a dozen or more different ways throughout the centuries, culminating finally in the idea enunciated by Burroughs and, of course, used by Wilson. There are dozens of similar seeds of wisdom sown throughout Prometheus Rising that are bound to have a seminal effect wherever and whenever the book is read. This is one of the many virtues of Wilson's book. It will leave its mark on all those who read it, and those seeds will surely take root and bloom in the most unlikely minds, as well as in the more prosaic. Tarot advocates will find the most unusual and illuminating interpretations of some of their favorite cards when he falls back on the basic neural circuits. I found them all illuminating as providing a new viewpoint which had to be integrated into my general view of such matters. The only area where I was reluctantly inclined to be at odds with Wilson was in what I considered to be his addiction to a utopia, which he eloquently enough expresses as the birth pangs of a cosmic Prometheus, rising out of the long nightmare of domesticated primate history. The history of mankind is also the history of one utopia after another, being enunciated with enthusiasm and vigor, calling upon all the facts of faith and science as they existed at that moment in space-time to corroborate the fantasy. A decade or maybe a century elapsed and the fantasy is no more. The utopia has gone down the drain to join all the other utopias of earlier primates. However, I sincerely hope that Wilson is right in this case. Now, I'm not unmindful of the fact that the utopia of which Wilson speaks, echoing many of the best scientific and philosophical minds of our day, is a distinct possibility at some time, but that it could occur within the next decade seems rather improbable to me. It seems improbable, of course, only in terms of the current state of world enlightenment, or lack of it, and because it implies a miracle occurring in vast numbers of living primates simultaneously, whatever semantic theories are involved in the meaning of the word simultaneously. Anyway, this is a minor point considering the seminal brilliance of the greater part of this enlightening book. In a previously written book, Wilson wrote that, quote, in 1964, Dr. John S. Bell published a demonstration that still has the physicists reeling. What Bell seemed to prove was that quantum effects are non-local in Bohm's sense. That is, They're not just here or there, but both. What this apparently means is that space and time are only real to our mammalian sense organs. They are not really real. Quote, this writing reminds me of so much of the Hindu concept of Indra's net. The latter is sometimes described as being a great net extending throughout the whole universe, vertically to represent time, horizontally to represent space. At each point where the threads of this Indra's net cross one another is a diamond or a crystal bead, the symbol of a single existence. Each crystal bead reflects on its shining surface not only every other bead in the whole net of Indra, but every single reflection of every other bead upon each individual bead. Countless, endless reflections of one another. We could also liken it to a single candle being placed in the center of a large hall. Around this hall, tens of mirrors are arranged in such a manner that, when the candle was lit, one saw not only its reflection in each individual mirror, but also the reflections of the reflections in every other mirror repeated ad infinitum. One of the several virtues of Prometheus Rising is that Wilson, using Leary's neurological circuits, believes that a new philosophical paradigm is about due. In reality, this is really Wilson's answer to my proposed criticism of his utopian fantasy. It may not be within a decade that we will realize whether it is true or false. But that is not important. What's clear is that, thanks to the insights of many modern thinkers, many intellectual findings do not come solely from the slow drip and grind of tiny new discoveries, or from new theories simply being added to our present armamentarium of time-honored truisms. Rather, quantum leaps in outlook a la Teilhard de Chardin occur with a fantastic jump to a new horizon or level of perception. This insight usually comes from a revolutionary overview, which realigns or transforms former thinking into a new and more enlightening frame of reference. This dovetails with this equally fascinating thesis that everything alive is really alive in the fullest and most dynamic sense of the word. It twitches, searches, throbs, organizes, and seems aware of an upward movement. Twitches seems almost the right word, recalling to mind the myoclonisms of Wilhelm Reich's vegetotherapy, which at some time are infinitely disturbing to the patient on the couch who, because of them, feels he is falling apart, being shattered into 1,000 pieces. He isn't really. It is as though the organism were gathering itself together for an upward or forward leap into the unknown, to a higher order of looking at things. The transition to a higher order of functioning, or hooking on to a higher neural circuit, is often accompanied by considerable anxiety or a turbulence in personal life, which seems as if the organism were falling apart or breaking up. This phenomenon of instability is really the way that every living organism, societies, human primates, chemical solutions, etc., shakes itself, as it were, by myoclonisms or similar convulsions into new combinations and permutations for higher and new levels of development. So perhaps the space-time utopia of a new area of primate exploration has some validity after all, as indicating that the more vigorous the disturbance of myoclonism, the greater the quantum jump into a higher neurological circuit. This is one reason why I firmly believe that the transition to the next spiral will not be smooth nor without much suffering and chaos. All of which suggests, with Wilson and Leary, that the brain is considerably more sophisticated than any of us previously had imagined. It's quite possible that it operates in dimensions so beyond the lower neural circuitry that it occasionally throws us a bone every day so that we can continue to function in the make-believe world of everyday status quo. In the meantime, it is a multidimensional structure at ease in far more than the narrow primate world we've been programmed to live in. It may interpret waves and frequencies from other dimensions, realms of light, of meaningful, unrestricted pattern reality that are here and now, and which transcend our present myopic tunnel realities of our rigid perceptions and conceptualizations of space and time. If so, then the title of this book, Prometheus Rising, is representative of more than a catchy title to a profound, fascinating book. It becomes a title instead to the very attempt which we are now making to reach beyond ourselves with a quantum leap into a whole new world which has been envisaged only by a very few. Wilson is one of this group who are preparing themselves, and if we allow them, the rest of us, to take our place in the new aeon. I will close with a quote from Wilson. Quote, "We are all giants raised by pygmies, who have learned to walk with a perpetual mental crouch. Unleashing our full stature, our total brain power, is what this book is about." End quote. Israel Regardi, Phoenix, Arizona, July 1983. Warning. Wilson describes himself as a guerrilla ontologist, signifying his intent to attack language and knowledge the way terrorists attack their targets, to jump out from the shadows for an unprovoked attack, then slink back and hide behind a hearty belly laugh. Robert Schaefer, the Skeptical Inquirer. Thus concludes Section 6.2 of Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Tomorrow we will continue with Section 6.3, Chapter 1, The Thinker and the Prover. I will see you then. Alam.